1,000 deaths, or one murder. Your petty quarrels only make me stronger.
Before I get started, I want to thank Crimson KB for inspiring me to make this video after he posted his video titled What Could Have Been Shadowlands plus Yogg-Saron. Be sure to check out that video and subscribe to his channel and follow him on Twitch. He makes a lot of good content and seems like a nice guy. Now, you might be looking at the thumbnail for this video and thinking, Doom, really? Yogg-Saron is the most underrated character in Warcraft? Nobody hates Yogg-Saron. Ulduar is one of the best raids Blizzard's ever produced. He is one of, if not the most beloved set of cards in Hearthstone. How can you say Yogg-Saron is underrated? Well, easily actually. Look at most of the character tier lists for Warcraft, and where does Yogg usually end up? In an S to F scale, usually A or B. And since he is absolutely an S tier character, that means he is, as far as I'm concerned, being underrated. How many people are talking about Yogg-Saron outside of people like me, who think the Old Gods are Warcraft's most interesting plot point and faction, Hearthstone players, or people nostalgic for Wrath of the Lich King? Nobody. Which I think is a shame, since when you really break it down, Yogg-Saron, both directly and indirectly, is probably the most influential character in the development of Azeroth and, arguably, the single most important character in Warcraft. Don't believe me? Alright, let's go over it.
I am destiny.
For those of you who are not aware, the Curse of Flesh is a condition inflicted on the Titan Pantheon's creations by Yogg-Saron to convert the stone and steel constructs to flesh. This significantly decreases their lifespan, makes them weaker, and really just screws up a lot of the Keeper's plans for Azeroth as a whole. The curse by itself caused a bunch of drama with the Mogu, the Anubiseth, the Mechanomes, and other constructs, but its true impact would be its generational damage. Currently in World of Warcraft, there are 23 playable races. 8 of them directly can tie their existence to Yogg-Saron. Both variants of humans, gnomes, and dwarves descend directly from the cursed Titan constructs. Forsaken are almost always humans. Worgen are cursed humans, or if you want to be a smartass, doubly cursed Titan constructs. And if you want to stretch a bit, 7 of the other races owe their existence to Y'Shaarj, the mightiest of the Old Gods, since the scar he left on the world ultimately is where the trolls, and by extension the elves, originate from. And yes, I know the well is probably like 99.999% Titan blood, but 1. Y'Shaarj was a big guy, so I bet a little bit of his blood got mixed in there, since the well is not really an open wound at that stage. And 2. Regardless of if any of Y'Shaarj remained in the well itself simply would not exist if the Old God wasn't there. So I think Y'Shaarj should get at least a little bit of credit for those things. This also means, with the exception of the Draenei, every Alliance race in part owes the Old Gods for their existence in some way. Maybe that's why N'Zoth seems so upset about Stormwind having a church for the light. Actually, on a quick side note, tinfoil hat on, I'm pretty much convinced when the Mantid talk about Y'Shaarj blighting the land with his last terrible breath, they are not talking about the Shah. They are talking about the elves. Like, when you really look at it, the Shah did not really do that much, they just messed with some pandas, who cares? Let's look over the elves' biggest accomplishments real quick. The Night Elves summoned the Burning Legion and almost Sargeras himself. And then there was a demonic-infused Night Elf that literally opened the portal Sargeras used to stab the world. The Blood Elves sided with the demons and summoned Kil'jaeden, who probably would have tried to summon Sargeras at some point. The Nightfallen sided with Gul'dan as he tried to summon Sargeras, again. Seriously, we are 3 for 3 pre-BFA for summoning demonic forces to end the world. The point is, keep an eye on the Void Elves, and if you see a Void Elf Warlock, kill it on sight. But enough about Y'Shaarj and elves, back to Yogg-Saron's Curse of Flesh. Given the earlier chart, it is clear he is responsible for a lot of major characters existing at all. Let's just go over a few of those to put in perspective how impactful the Old God of Northrend has been throughout Azeroth's history. Tirion Fordring, Medivh, Khadgar, Jaina Proudmoore, Aegwynn, Taranis Menethil, Arthas Menethil, remember him, we'll talk about him more later, Varian Wrynn, Turalyon, Bolvar Fordragon, Antonidas, Ronan, Edwin Van Cleave, Argyll, Kel'Thuzad, Bloodmage Thamos, Sally Whitemane, Thessarion, Archbishop Benedictus, Daneth Trollbane, Alexandros Mograine, Darian Mograine, Uther, Anduin Lothar, Anduin Wynn, King Yimmeron, Skadi, God King Skovald, Magni Bronzebeard, Muradin Bronzebeard, Bran Bronzebeard, Moira Thoresen, Emperor Thoresen, Hemet Nessingwary, Getlin Mechatork, Sicko Thermoplood, Milhouse Manastorm, Toshli, Tinkmaster Overspark, Silius Darkmoon, Gang Greymane, Admiral Ripsnar, Nathanos Blightcaller, Lillian Voss, Lord Godfrey, Grand Apothecary Putris, Gunther Arcanus, Anu Barak, Killix, Anu Brakan, Kithix. All of these characters and more you can ultimately tie back throughout the generations to Yogg-Saron. Without the old god, they simply would not exist. Imagine Warcraft without Arthas. Before Shadowlands. There is no doubt his actions have shaped the history of Azeroth, especially in the last few centuries, possibly more than any single being. It cannot be overstated how big a deal the Curse of Flesh actually is in the history of Azeroth. The Curse of Flesh was not Yogg-Saron's only major gift to the world, though. No, he had another one, albeit indirectly. You see, some druids thought it was a good idea to plant some huge tree over his prison, and the roots of said tree touched Yogg-Saron and immediately got corrupted. They cut down the tree, but not before Yogg-Saron tore open a rift into the Emerald Dream to spread corruption throughout Azeroth's realm of nature as well. The Emerald Dream is a pretty important thing. It has a connection to Ardenweald and is effectively a blueprint of Azeroth had the mortal races, the old gods, and the titans not removed so many trees. So the Void getting direct access to it, to put it lightly, is bad. Now, Yogg-Saron may have made this vehicle, but N'Zoth ultimately is the one to drive it, delivering the Emerald Nightmare to all the green dragons, eventually even Ysera, a bunch of the druids, and Xavius, who is a former Night Elf who helps the Burning Legion. Seriously, you cannot make this up. Keep an eye on the elves. Despite the efforts of many different druids, the player characters, and several expansions, the Emerald Nightmare still persists to this day. Though whether it will become a major threat again, or if it is at present too small to be a real issue, is yet to be seen.
He will learn. No king rules forever. Only death is eternal.
Arthas Menethil, remember him? Good. He and Yogg-Saron have a connection. Not a direct one. Yogg-Saron is not piloting Arthas' brain. That would be Zovaal. No, the connection between the two is indirect, but oh so bad for us. The shortest way I can explain this would be to say, Zovaal is a moron. Okay, maybe we need a little bit more explanation than that. So, in Wrath of the Lich King, the developers said Yogg-Saron and the Lich King, who at the time was Arthas, had a connection which they did a poor job of explaining in-game. This connection all comes down to an ore mostly found in Northrend called Cyanite, the black blood of Yogg-Saron. Cyanite has many extremely useful properties, such as being extremely durable, highly resistant to nature and holy magic, and being pretty lightweight. Arthas, being in part puppeteered by Zovaal, who I remind you, is a complete moron, uses Cyanite for basically everything. The whole of his fortress is either plated or solid Cyanite, which is all well and good if you ignore the really key point that it is the blood of an old god. And not just any old god, Yogg-Saron. Now, I can hear you argue, Doom, the Scourge are immune to Yogg-Saron's influence because they are mindless undead, and the Helm of Domination controls them, so there should not be any real issue with them using it for Icecrown Citadel. And you would be completely right if that is all you are factoring into this. So let's look at what Icecrown Citadel is actually for, according to Shadowlands. Zovaal, through Arthas, has his undead minions build a huge soul engine deep under the ground, the Forge of Souls, and a barrel of sorts which follows the frozen throne toward the sky where the rift between worlds would eventually be. Zovaal's plan was to suck up the soul of Azeroth through this Cyanite engine to fuel his cosmic rewriting of creation, to unify the cosmic forces and make death reign over all, Void included. Of course, this plan fails. Arthas dies atop Icecrown and eventually goes away forever as some blue soul mist. Zovaal, the moron, has his batteries drained and goes away hopefully forever, and the giant death rift closes, restoring the veil between the Shadowlands and Azeroth. But you know what did not disappear and is, in fact, still there to this day? The huge mound of Yogg-Saron's extremely corruptive blood that is so deep into the world it can suck Azeroth's very soul out. Zovaal is such a complete and incomprehensible moron, he collected as much of Yogg-Saron's blood as possible, clumped it together, and put it next to the sleeping Titan. He has ensured Yogg-Saron is able to resume slowly corrupting Azeroth, even still fully in his prison, and has somehow made the Void have an even easier time claiming Azeroth than if he had done nothing. In the end, despite going out of the way to not help the Void, Zilval ends up as an unintentional and unknown pawn of Yogg-Saron.
Look upon the true face of death, and know that your end comes soon.
Now, keep in mind, this is all just stuff Yogg-Saron influences while imprisoned, not even able to use the full might of its incredible power. Fully unleashed, the Old God was a completely different level of dangerous. During the days of the Black Empire, Yogg-Saron was second only to Y'Shaarj in pure power. When the war between the Black Empire and the Titan forces really started to make headway, Y'Shaarj was deemed too powerful for the Titan forces and ripped out of the world, leaving just C'Thun, N'Zoth, and Yogg-Saron. C'Thun and N'Zoth put up a fight, but were contained with relatively little issue, leaving all the Keepers and their armies to deal with Yogg-Saron alone. Being the last of the free Old Gods against a force that took down the other two should mean Yogg-Saron would go down all the same, right? Wrong. Yogg-Saron was so powerful he nearly won the war for the Black Empire on his own. And tinfoil hat theory, I believe he actually could have won and chose not to. Why would he do that? Well, look what happened to the last Old God that was too much for the Titan Keepers. Y'Shaarj got ripped out of the planet like a tick and was torn apart, leaving just some Shah, some weirdly self-destructive elves, and his heart behind. Yogg-Saron would know victory here would lead to total defeat, whereas being imprisoned and having the Titans leave thinking all is well would ultimately lead to victory. What sounds more likely to you? The Titan Keepers are able to create illusions that would overpower these creatures linked to Yogg-Saron, the second strongest Old God, and the one that created them, and turn them on each other, or Yogg-Saron letting the Keepers believe it worked and sacrificing a few minions in that battle to ensure the corruption of the world in the future. Keep in mind, the Old Gods at this time were not working together yet. Each of them wanted to be the one to secure the final prize, Azeroth. N'Zoth may be the smartest of them, but Yogg-Saron is no fool. After all, he has a brain that's so large it has its own health bar. So Yogg-Saron ultimately gets imprisoned again, and the Black Empire is fully contained. Now, before I continue, I need to briefly go over the Titan Keepers. There are 9 of them in total. Archaides, Loken, Thorum, Freya, Mimiron, Hodir, Tyr, Ra, and Odin. They all play a part in the ordering of Azeroth, and when the Old Gods were imprisoned, they had to watch them and make sure they stayed that way. So let me ask you this. How many Titan Keepers were watching N'Zoth? 0. How about C'Thun? 1. Ra was watching over C'Thun before he found out Sargeras destroyed the entire Titan pantheon and left for the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. So really, C'Thun had nobody to watch him either. Now, how many Keepers were watching Yogg-Saron? 8. Originally, anyway. By the time the players get there, it's down to 5. Archaides would eventually leave Ulduar to do some other things and then get killed by players for some reason. Odin would end up getting really mad about the Dragon Aspects creation and go make a special area in the sky for warriors, and Tyr would blow up fighting 2 freed minions of Yogg-Saron sent by Loken to keep his constant string of failures quiet from the other Keepers. So let's go over that again real quick. N'Zoth, Old God behind Deathwing, Azshara, and most of the Emerald Nightmare. No Keepers. C'Thun, unleashed bugs in Kalimdor that almost took the continent. 1 Keeper, who gave up halfway. Yogg-Saron, 8 out of 9 Keepers specifically watching him. If that does not tell you how big a deal Yogg-Saron is, just in comparison to the other Old Gods, I don't think anything will. Oh, and remember those 5 Keepers who were supposed to be watching Yogg-Saron, keeping the Old God contained? He corrupted all of them too. And by the time Wrath of the Lich King is out, Yogg-Saron is in near complete control of Ulduar, the Titan Forged, and everything that goes on in relation to them. Yogg-Saron being fully unleashed would have been the end for the mortal races. There were no Titans this time, the Keepers bowed to his whispers, and I feel like with the Old Gods now working together a bit more since their imprisonment, Deathwing would probably become a piece on the board a bit earlier than we saw. With what the Old God of Northrend would unleash, the world might even prefer being consumed by the Scourge.
Bow down before the god of death.
Now, this segment is a bit more speculation than lore facts, so take this with a grain of salt. Yogg-Saron is an old god, an incredibly powerful entity of the void, but of the 4 old gods, he seems to spend a lot of time talking about a different cosmic power, death. He even refers to himself as the god of death. Originally I thought, well, he's in Northrend with the Lich King and all the undead, so like how N'Zoth calls himself the god of the deep because he's underwater, Yogg-Saron calls him the god of death because he's on a continent of undead and sees them as pawns. Now though, I think there's more to it. What if I were to tell you Yogg-Saron's whispers in Howling Fjord and Ulduar were a warning about Shadowlands specifically? Madness, yes, I know, but hear me out. Il'gynoth is already one example of the Void giving information to players about future events and plans of the Void in indirect, vague ways.
Her heart is a crater, and we have filled it. At the hour of her 3rd death, she ushers in our coming. The Golden One claims a vacant throne. The crown of light will bring only darkness. The vassal of life disguises treachery. Beware the eyes of greed.
N'Zoth does the same thing in the Rise of Azshara content.
The light has struck a bargain with the enemy of all. The veil wanes. His crown will open the way.
With that in mind, listen to these whispers of Yogg-Saron again.
Hope is an illusion. Trust is your weakness. You are a pawn of forces unseen. They are coming for you. Your will is no longer your own. It was your fault. Tell yourself again that these are not truly your friends. Kill them all before they kill you. There is no escape, not in this life, not in the next.
Strangely consistent, isn't it? Alright, so now we have established Yogg-Saron has pretty clear connections and understanding of death and is planning something to do with that cosmic power, which given the Void's concern about what death's goals are, makes perfect sense. So, I have a question for you. Have you ever asked what the Void wants a Dark Titan for? It is always stated that the Old God's endgame is to corrupt a Titan and align it with the Void, but to what end? To just consume the universe? Possibly, certainly, but I think we have stumbled into their true plans, or at least one of their potential endgames. Yogg-Saron wants to use the Void-corrupted Azeroth to claim the Shadowlands. We know the Void tried to take the Shadowlands once before and failed, so this time they are preparing for another attempt using something far more powerful as their herald. I do not believe there is a single or collective force the Shadowlands could muster which would be able to stand up to a Void-consumed Azeroth being piloted by Yogg-Saron. Why would Yogg-Saron give players whispers about the Shadowlands? Because the corrupted Titan constructs which make up a large portion of the player base will go to the Shadowlands. It was not just a warning, it was a declaration and rallying cry of the true end goal, the true enemy, death. In the end, Zereth Mortis will either serve the Void or be destroyed.
Your fate is bound to me.
Now, with all that in mind, what would you say if I told you Yogg-Saron is the reason Azeroth is still around at all? At this point, you would probably call me absolutely crazy, to which I say, That is offensive. Could you reasonably call someone who has a complete set of Old God plushies on their bed crazy? Actually, don't answer that. Instead, let's talk for a second about the player characters. The players are, bar none, the strongest force in Warcraft. They have been undefeated for nearly 17 years. The Burning Legion, the Black Empire, the forces of life and death, all fall before the player's endless drive to collect slightly worse-looking armor sets. They are the saviors of Azeroth. But do you recall that image with all the playable races and remember the ones that originate from Yogg-Saron? If you compare that data with the data from a distribution of WoW character races, which admittedly is not up to date since I can't seem to find one from 2022, you will find around 35% of the whole WoW player base's characters also owe their existence to Yogg-Saron. If you want to get crazy and accept my give Yasharaj some credit stance, 71% of players owe their character's existence to the Old Gods in general. Now, rather than recoiling in existential dread that more than a third of the player base are elves, and what that really says about the survival chances of Azeroth, let's think about those numbers for a second. If you are an Alliance player like myself most of the time, and are not in a fully Draenei and Elf guild, the Children of Yogg-Saron have been doing a lot for you. About 60% of the players in the Alliance owe Yogg-Saron bare minimum a Mallow style, thanks for creating me. Or if you add in Yasharaj, 80% of the Alliance. Yeah, no, the Church of the Light has to go. We need a statue of Yogg-Saron in the middle of Stormwind. Maybe a void version of the fountain in Dalaran too. The Horde, on the other hand, really doesn't have much connection to Yogg-Saron. Really only the Forsaken at 12% of the Horde's total player base. And unlike the Alliance, the Forsaken do have the Church of Shadow. Interestingly, if you count Yasharaj, that number spikes up to 60%, which, again, shows there's a lot more elves than you would think. I fully expect that 60% to grow higher when the Mantid, for one reason or another, eventually join the Horde. So basically, if you are Alliance, praise Yogg-Saron, and if you're Horde, curse Yasharaj. Just not within earshot of the Mantid. The Old Gods are nearly as old as Azeroth itself. Countless stories within its history are either in part or entirely centered around their machinations or the side effects thereof. Yet it is often N'Zoth who people gravitate towards being the one behind some of the major events that happened actually in the World of Warcraft, like Cataclysm. In the short term, N'Zoth definitely appears to have been the biggest threat to Azeroth. Yet, if you look at things from a bigger picture, it is clear which Old God is the most significant, the one from which all of the big plays are coming from, and the one who, intentionally or not, has been the biggest threat on Azeroth as a whole. Not Yasharaj, who was ripped out of the world in the Great Ordering, not Cthulhu, who remained bound and dormant in a barren desert, not N'Zoth, nearly betrayed by his own minions. No, we know who was truly meant to claim the world. Praise Yogg-Saron, the god of Azeroth.
Your fate is sealed. The end of days is finally upon you, and all who inhabit this miserable little seedling. Ului Bisarak, Gagerong,